Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here, and the time has arrived. A yearly tradition. Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports, who has shed so much blood and tears leading up to this draft, breaking down every possible scenario, traveling to the combine, breaking down the film, doing all the grades, everything else, and then analyzing it live throughout the draft process as it was going on. And we have finally got draft picks to break down. This is the moment, Chris, that we wait for every single year, and it has arrived. Are you ready, sir?
I'm ready. This is my favorite podcast to record every year. For as much as I love all the speculation and talking through evaluations as I'm making them and the combine numbers come in and we identify needs after free agency, I like talking about the actual picks. So now that we know where these guys were selected, what needs were filled, what weren't, who went too early, who went too late, who was the steal, this is actually a lot more fun for me and probably for you than like talking through mock draft simulations and rumors in March and April.
I feel like if you ever watch one of those disaster movies like Twister or something, when it's finally all over and the people survived and they sort of like, or like in Speed, where I think Keanu Reeves kisses whatever her name is and they sort of like get together or whatever. That's not exactly us here, but I mean, we just like after the storm is gone, it's finally over. The Twister has passed. The flaming bus has finally been put out, and we are the survivors of draft season. So now we get to kind of have all the sun come out and break down these picks. I hope that metaphor made some sense. But why don't we do this? Let's go pick by pick for the Vikings, and then we'll circle back and talk about big picture and what you thought of some other teams and draft picks. But why don't we begin with Jordan Addison? I have spent days talking about how much I liked it. How did you feel about it?
Well, this is what I love about my job is that I can't go back and do anything in hindsight with bias because my rankings are out there and the faithful, the hundreds of thousands of faithful Purple Insider listeners probably remember that I believe our first dual mock draft sim that we did, I think I picked Nolan Smith and you picked Jordan Addison. And I said it at that time, he was my number 45 overall player. That's where he finished. My wide receiver 5. So I thought it was a little early, but even on that episode, I said, I didn't like the general idea that in first round receivers, maybe up until the last few years, if you get picked in the first round at wide receiver, you're the wide receiver 1. But I like that in Minnesota, maybe in LA with the Chargers, with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, with some other teams, Jordan Addison would be the clear wide receiver number 2, or maybe even wide receiver 3 to begin his career. So because of that, I think it's funny. And I think on that episode, I talked about the parallels between his size, his game, his workout to Calvin Ridley and the Julio Jones situation for Calvin Ridley in 2018. I'm getting a lot of those vibes that we will see someone that won't get a lot of targets comparative to most first-round wide receivers just because of the presence of Justin Jefferson, but could have a pretty quick start to his career like Calvin Ridley did, despite not being very big, actually pretty small, and not being, in terms of on paper, a high-caliber athlete. He runs good routes. He catches everything. Yards after the catch is pretty good despite those physical limitations. So it's just kind of came full circle that Jordan Addison kind of said, hey, I really model my game after Calvin Ridley, and I got legitimate Calvin Ridley vibes while watching him.
Yeah, give me some more detail on the criticisms for Jordan Addison, because to tell you the truth, since I had targeted Jordan Addison pretty early on in the draft process, I like the pick. I thought that when I watched him at USC and I saw, a handful of games just watching Caleb Williams like everybody else and Kenny Pickett, he really made him a first round pick. I just saw this dude open all the time. And for me, it's really not much more complicated than that, right? Like route running, quickness. And I know that he's not a burner, and I know that he's not Quentin Johnston in terms of his size or his yak ability like that. He's not going to break a bunch of tackles and be Deebo Samuel, but I liked his game from that perspective. But also when we met him the other day, I guarantee you he's the smallest draft pick that's ever stood in front of us. A lot smaller than Justin Jefferson, a lot smaller than Christian Darrisaw, for example, who my first observation was, oh my goodness, this is the largest human being. But very, very small, very slender. And I don't think he has a frame that's going to get bigger. So I could see that. But give me some more details on things that he might have to overcome in the NFL.
So here's what I would say with Jordan Addison, why he, I think, was universally liked and why I still liked him, but I was maybe a little lower. A lot of wide receiver prospects, and this is probably the case for any position, but a lot of wide receivers, they can have like a clear flaw. Like some wide receivers are just, they run 4.62 or 4.58, and you're like, that's too slow. He is just going to have no ability to get vertical. Corners aren't going to really be, afraid of that at the NFL level. Some aren't physical enough, clearly not. I don't get that sense with Jordan Addison that he has one clear weakness. It's just that he is a little bit smaller. He's a lot small. So physicality throughout the route, not just at the line of scrimmage, is a little bit of a concern. Yards after the catch, and what I've grown to realize is that in today's NFL, unless you are the most dynamic athlete out there, a Jalen Waddle, a Tyreek Hill, yards after the catch is most typically accumulated on a consistent level by that contact balance. You mentioned Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, DJ Moore, Laviska Shenault. Those are the wide receivers that can bounce off linebackers, corner, safety. That's when you get the most efficient yards after the catch. That's not really Jordan Addison's game, but he is quick enough and he does have the vision to create after the catch. So I'm a little concerned about yards after the catch and the contested catches because he's pretty small. He's not a 41-inch vertical guy, doesn't have a gigantic catch radius. I'm slightly concerned about if Kirk Cousins does give him a lot of opportunities that he's certainly grown accustomed to doing with Justin Jefferson, on those slot fades or those back shoulders or, digs over the middle where there's that corner kind of in his hip pocket. How is he going to do in those contested catch situations? A little bit concerned in that area. I don't think he has bad hands. I think he did make some difficult grabs at Pitt and USC. So you combined all those things together, that's 3 or 4 components of playing receiver that I would grade him, say at a 7 or an 8 instead of a 9 or a 10 that you would like to see for a normal first-round pick. So it's not one thing that I'm super concerned about. It's just he gets dinged in almost all of those areas. Not route running, not getting open, not being quick. He's very good in those elements. And the fact that he's not, a low 4.4 guy that is just going to take the lid off the defense with his pure speed. So I like his well-roundedness, but I do think there are some kind of edges that need to be more refined once he gets to the next level.
Yeah, and I think in comparison to Justin Jefferson, who was drafted almost at the exact same draft slot, I think one, maybe 22nd versus 23rd, not really close in terms of the caliber of prospect, right? There was some concern about Jefferson getting off the line of scrimmage outside, but one of the reasons he was wide receiver 5 is that the other 4 guys were unbelievable prospects. Like, it hasn't worked out for Henry Ruggs because of an off-field thing. I think he was on his way to being a very good wide receiver, but one of the fastest, best deep weapons that we've seen in a long time as a prospect. CeeDee Lamb absolutely dominated college football. I have no idea why Jalen Reagor was picked there, but he was kind of freakish in his athleticism. I think that this year, when you're wide receiver 4, it's quite different than it was for Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Jefferson was a 97th percentile athlete, tall, supernatural basketball player, freak catches in contested catch situations. We saw it. I mean, he helped Joe Burrow become the number 1 draft pick. I don't see those things. I don't see magic from Jordan Addison. What I see is a guy who can consistently just get open and catch the ball. And to me, that is a crazy high value. Also somebody that seems extremely into football. Like, that's his thing from the time he was a little kid, and that he understands kind of the matrix of football, how it all works, and wants to grow in that way. And those things, I mean, those things are major positives for him, but I don't think anyone believes that in this spot you're drafting the next Justin Jefferson. You're kind of looking for somebody who can become, I think Calvin Ridley's a great comparison, a quality number 2 to pair with him. So I guess if you had taken a swing at somebody who had a higher ceiling, maybe like a Nolan Smith, then, maybe you could be talking about getting a star there. But I think your odds are very high of someone like this working out like with this description.
Yeah, and I think that last point is spot on, because even in that first mock draft sim that we did, I think I went with Nolan Smith, you went Jordan Addison. I did start that with the caveat, if you're, when in doubt, go offense. And we've been pounding the table for wide receiver. So for as much as I think we could all agree, probably all the listeners could agree, that Nolan Smith probably has a higher ceiling than Jordan Addison because of the athleticism, things like that, he doesn't play wide receiver. And even if he is a really, really good edge rusher, very valuable, probably very close to wide receiver in terms of value. But if Jordan Addison is just a really good wide receiver and he's playing next to Justin Jefferson, that will, I don't want to go into a war conversation, but that will do more to get more wins for this Vikings team, and to be that when you're in the playoffs and there's a elite corner covering Justin Jefferson, to be able to still move the football consistently. So because of that, we have said, quarterback and high value positions. They didn't pick a quarterback, but not my favorite receiver in the class. But again, someone that plays on the offensive side of the ball that does have, I think, a pretty high floor, even though he's still pretty young, because of what you mentioned. He just gets open.
Would you have picked Will Levis at that point?
Probably no. I was surprised that one of the teams in the 20s didn't pick him. Or that a team traded back into the first. It was weird that the Titans traded to 33 to not get that 5th-year option. Maybe they just couldn't trade up with the Eagles or the Chiefs. I wonder if they considered it. I don't know if they did. Maybe I would have thought about it, because that was the long-term upside play. And that, I think, kind of goes back to conversations that we had all the way back after listening to Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell at the Combine, where they seemed like hey, we're not doing, the 2018, 2019 Dolphins trying to tank for Caleb Williams. We just made the playoffs. We want to win. We want our resume as GM and head coach to still be very good, to buy us more job security in the future. So with that in mind, if that's what you told me, look, this team is not trying to go, 5-12, then no, I would have picked Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, one of the receivers. But if you're just looking at it from way philosophically, probably you should go quarterback at that spot because of Levis's upside and what you have at the position.
Yeah, I think that they viewed him as a Brady Quinn, and they just didn't see it with the throwing. And look, repeatedly through the process, there was breadcrumbs left by Kevin O'Connell when he kept saying accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. And it was like, okay, I think we know what you're getting at, but I wasn't sure if it was smoke screening. Everything I heard was that they didn't like either quarterback. And, but I wasn't reporting that. It was just kind of the buzz, and you never really know. But at the same time, if your head coach wants an accurate quarterback and you're talking about a guy who has major accuracy issues, and it sounds to me like a lot of teams thought it was major accuracy issues and not just something that could be corrected. I think that if any of the top 3 would have fallen anywhere, they would have been making phone calls like crazy. Yeah. And that was the only plan. It was if we can't get those guys, if Richardson doesn't fall, then we are taking Jordan Addison at number 23. And that's how it ultimately played out.
And what's good about that is that you and me, and I'm sure other guests that you have on, talk about, this Vikings team or just teams in general picking in the 20s, or if you have a Kirk Cousins type, or you literally have Kirk Cousins as your quarterback, should always be thinking about the quarterback spot. That's good that the Vikings really looked into the quarterback market in this class, but it's easy for me now to say, hey, maybe they should have looked at Will Levis. If your head coach or former quarterback is preaching the importance of accuracy, and they do their homework on the quarterback class and just do not like a quarterback, again, it's easy for me in theory to say, hey, just pick a quarterback because, that's a high or the highest valued position. It's another thing to actually be in the war room and say, we're just going to pick a quarterback that we don't like at all because he's a quarterback. That is where the football theories, the draft philosophies, and the logistics of an actual team build kind of clash, where I think maybe some GMs and coaches are like, look, we can't just pick a quarterback that we don't believe in just because he plays quarterback. So as long as the Vikings were like, all right, let's start at ground zero and watch Stroud and watch Young and watch Levis and watch Richardson, maybe even Hendon Hooker, and then maybe dwindle it down to only the top 3, then that's totally fine with me, because you can't put your job on the line with the quarterback, even at 23, that you don't believe in. And if they didn't believe in Will Levis, which I don't think is crazy because he was by far my QB4 in this class, then I'm fine with them not taking him.
Well, I was just going to say, last year when we talked on this very same pod, you were a little down because you liked Malik Willis more than the league did. And I think that all the other quarterbacks you didn't think were really first-round picks, maybe Kenny Pickett, but it was really him who you liked from his tape. And then the NFL said, no, we don't like it for his tape. Now this year, you were number 1 on Anthony Richardson, and he's picked 4th overall. So that's right on. And CJ Stroud, I think it was your order was maybe Richardson, Stroud, and then Young, or was it maybe Young second?
Yep.
Okay, it was Stroud. Okay. So, but Levis was a distant 4th. So you very much had this. Why do you think that the mock universe in general did not? Like the ESPN analytics that they kept showing were not really well explained by the broadcast.
No.
But part of it is, largely based on mock drafts, scouting reports. And that's why they had expected him to go somewhere between number 1 and number 8. And when he didn't, it was very surprising. But maybe not surprising to you, who evaluated him kind of far beyond the other guys. So why do you think there was that disconnect?
I'm not sure. I think we are in a phase with QB evaluations because of a lot of the elite quarterbacks that if you have a big arm and you're decently athletic, you're going to get pushed up the board regardless of how bad your final season is. And it's kind of like you could look at it 2 ways and say, hey, look, like when he had NFL talent, Wendell Robinson with him, Dorian Kennard, who was like, I think a 4th or 5th round pick by the Chiefs last year, offensive lineman. Look, he can be like this guy that's on the first round radar. Those guys were gone and he didn't really elevate anyone. He threw more interceptions, just wasn't as efficient as a passer. To me, that final season is what I pay most attention to. You're not going to say, hey, look, back 4 years ago, he was really good, or 2 years ago, he was really good. So to me, it seemed obvious that he was like a tier below those top 3. But I don't know. I guess a lot of other people were just clinging to the upside that I thought was a lot more apparent with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I said this maybe on a pod that we did at the Combine, where when I watched Anthony Richardson for one half of football, I was like, whoa, not whoa, as in all the stats are perfect or whatever. And sometimes throws would go directly into the ground or sail on him, but he ran for a touchdown against Utah. And I went, oh my gracious, that is a NFL player right there. And that never happened when I watched Will Levis. I saw a few of his games and it was like, you would have to tell me, you'd have to be like, oh yeah, the league is saying or the mock drafters are saying he's, a top quarterback. And I think even just like the smell test, it never quite passed it. But just like with Malik Willis, I think a lot of people thought, well, if he's got a big arm and he's got athleticism, the league is going to like him because they have with guys like this before. But I think we've also seen a lot of similar players drop, and it shouldn't have been that huge of a surprise when it happened. So let's move on to Mekhi Blackmon.
Yes.
If there is any controversy to be had, it's this pick. However, I'm planting the flag on this one, Chris, and saying that I think it's a good idea because I think that he fits with what they want for Brian Flores. I think that was really important with this guy, and that sort of trumped anything else in their process, which I'm okay with. But as a player in particular, well, give me your take on the pick, and then as a player in particular, kind of what you see from him.
All right, this is full transparency. I always talk about my scouting grade book. It's a formula. It's a Google Sheet system that I have created. I've done it since 2019. So this is my 5th draft class. This is a player, and it happens on either ends of the spectrum. Mekhi Blackmon was a player that, and I could read my scouting report. It's super long. It's probably not good for the podcast. It'd be boring. But in watching him and writing my scouting report, it felt like he was going to be like a 3rd round grade. He ultimately finished as like a 5th round grade for me. So it was like, I liked him. I was excited when I plugged in because size factors in, and he's a pretty small corner and 5'11", 170-ish, 31-inch arms, which is not crazy short, but it's certainly not that 32-inch threshold that I think a lot of teams like. I think that brought down his grade quite a bit because I did see him. He battles really hard, but at times it's just like, man, he's just too small. And I'm worried about that at the next level. However, in terms of ball production and mirroring ability to follow those routes, especially squeezing those wide receivers out of bounds and finding the football on those back shoulders and playing bigger and playing with that kind of mentality that, hey, I'm the small guy. They're going to try to pick on me and I'm going to be ready for it. I love that about Mekhi Blackmon's game. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to with the tenacity that will fit with Brian Flores' scheme. He doesn't look like Xavier Howard or Byron Jones or Jalen Ramsey, but he kind of has that nastiness and he can back it up because he does have smooth movements on the field to, again, follow those intricate routes that we're seeing a lot more frequent in today's NFL.
So he graded above 85 in man coverage, above 85 in zone coverage by PFF.
Yeah, he was just solid.
And
solid.
90 as a tackler. So you know who this kind of reminded me of? And this is the thing, right? Like sometimes in the third round, teams are taking swings at athletes and trying to get maybe a home run. He reminds me of like a Nickel Roby-Coleman, where, I mean, this is a guy we talked about in Vikings land years ago when he was a free agent as a nickel corner. If you're drafting someone whose upside is a nickel corner who is very undersized, that's not exciting to anyone, but also nickel corner is super important. And it's really, really important in Brian Flores' defense. And that's why I like it. I think that, you know, when people on the outside evaluate these things, they evaluate it for the whole league. And they look at skill sets and size, like you're saying, like you looked at his size and thought, okay, this guy's probably not going to be a star outside corner with his size. But if he is a nickel corner, like Nickel Roby-Coleman, very undersized, but kind of a little dog, like a tenacious, you know, kind of player, I mean, you can make it and you could be really valuable. And so I totally get what they saw. And that's what, like, there were times last year when we talked about the draft where I said, dude, I just don't really get it. And like this, I totally got.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I certainly remember Roby-Coleman making the Bills as an undrafted free agent and was a good player for them in the slot. And I don't remember specifically what his combine workout was or even if he got invited to the combine, but I know he wasn't, or I'm pretty sure he was not some, 41-inch vertical 4.4 guy. He just had instincts through the roof, made a lot of plays at USC and in the NFL. That's kind of the vibe that I got with Blackmon. That's a good comparison. The point that you brought up about how he graded in man and zone, it's like watching all these corners, you instantly write in your scouting report, like, oh, needs to be in zone or press man only. I didn't get that at all. Like those vibes from Blackmon, he was off coverage, press man, press bail, quarters, cover two. He really seems to understand football. And I think that's kind of a theme early on that you mentioned that Jordan Addison seems like a football junkie. I think Mekhi Blackmon, because of the tenacity and that he seems to have every style of coverage down, playing inside, outside, all those different styles. It means to me that he's a student of the game and he understands that to be that overachiever at his size, he needs to really master everything. And I definitely saw that with him. But again, in my scouting grade book, I did have a 5th round grade on him because of the speed limitations and the size limitations.
So it's interesting that when you look at RAS, relative athletic score, the Vikings went against it more than any other team. Now they only had 6 picks. So they could have, if they had more picks, they could have drafted like 4 freaks and evened it out. But that seemed to be something that was a big change with Brian Flores. Like he clearly had something in mind. And that takes us to our next pick, which is Jay Ward, who I guess you would call him hybrid out of LSU. Now, I'm really interested in your take on this one because I'm intrigued by a college player. I don't see it too much. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see it too much where a guy plays all over the field. Normally, they play one position if they're going to be a draft pick. And just in general, you don't see too many guys moving all over the field in college football. You do see it all the time in the NFL. And I got a great question from a listener about like whether being versatile is actually bad because you're sort of a master of none. But I don't think that, because I watched Harrison Smith be one of the most versatile players in the league, or Tyrann Mathieu, who was a corner and a safety at different times in his career. Like maybe those are outliers, but I think being able to do multiple things is better on the field, especially for a defensive coordinator like that. But I'm very interested to hear kind of where you had him and what your take was on him going into this.
All right. This is 2 in a row. I had a late 6th on him. So this is another one that was picked a little early. I do give some leeway with grades. Like, I don't go like, hey, I have you graded at 200. And unless you're pick 199 to 201, I think it's a terrible pick. I understand that the league is views the players differently. There's needs. So I thought it still was a little early. What I found interesting, and this is the segue back to Blackman. Blackman is such a good tackler. He's 5'11". He's not a great athlete, 170 pounds. I saw him wrapping up consistently, not a lot of missed tackles. Jay Ward, I think his RAS was pretty high, like in the 8 somewhere, missed a lot of tackles, would deliver that big hit that would get into the highlight reel, but there were times where he was attacking screens and underneath routes, shallow crosses, things like that, slants, where I think maybe he needs to be a little more under control. So it was just kind of funny to me that the smaller, lesser athlete was the more sure tackler. And I think that's what sunk Jay Ward's grade for me, that if you're playing that in space role, you have to be good tackling in space. And I think he has a ways to go in that regard. But the versatility, I'm certainly of the same belief that you are. In today's NFL, especially a D-back, is more valuable than just saying, I am a press man on an island corner on the perimeter. That's all I can do. And I saw him play linebacker. I saw him blitz off the edge. I saw him blitz up the middle, play slot corner, play free safety, play on the perimeter. So he is really that chess piece. And I think maybe that's more of a theme, that he and Blackman both can really play anywhere. You can be a nickel corner, outside corner. They got just 2 very versatile pieces. I think that was probably the biggest strength to both of their games. That's not super specific. And I like the fact that Jay Ward made a lot of plays on the football relative to how often he was targeted. A lot of times the linebackers and the safeties that I ultimately don't like are the ones that, were targeted, quote unquote targeted in their target area, let's say 150 times in college, and they had 2 picks and 3 pass breakups. Those guys are just not going to suddenly become Eric Kendricks and Harrison Smith in the NFL. They're just not. Like, you need to have an amazing situation, the best coaches in the league, and they have to get extremely lucky to just find the football. Jay Ward and Mekhi Blackman did do a great job getting their heads around, understanding, having awareness when the ball is arriving. So I like that about his game. But as, again, that versatile kind of downhill in the box safety more so than anything else, I would have liked to see him be a better tackler. But the coverage and the size and the range are certainly there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they just valued fit so much in this draft, and that makes sense to me. I also think that for both of these players, you mentioned it with Blackman, but football IQ would be very high on their list of things because it is such a versatile defense. I know that word, we're like beating it to death, but that's really true when you look at it, like asking players to line up all over the field, asking lots of players to understand blitzes. And I remember Jordan Hicks told me last year that to be a successful blitzer, you really have to understand blitzing and understand where you're supposed to be, the techniques, the blocking schemes, the skills of the other player you're blitzing against. And if they're going to do that a lot with guys like this, like Eric Rowe, and I think it was Brandon Jones in Miami, they use these 2 guys as versatile pieces. I wrote about this, how they lined them up. It was like 40% of snaps over here, 20 over there, 10 over there. And when you see like Jay Ward doing this, you've got to think that he was able to understand all those positions at a college level. Doesn't mean for sure he'll do it at the NFL level, but it's not a bad bet that he will with the previous experience.
One other player too, Javon Holland, as a rookie, had his best season in the NFL with Brian Flores. And that was one I remember scouting him and thinking, all right, this guy was best at free safety, and they moved him into the slot. Didn't really do as well in that final season at Oregon. Did have a bunch of picks early on. And then in Miami with Brian Flores, he was like a devastating blitzer. Like he would align at slot corner. He would reduce down from, free safety, strong safety, whatever, and blitz. And he was so good in his first season that last year that Brian Flores was in Miami, because he utilized him as just an aggressive downhill player. I could see a similar role for Jay Ward, who's a similar athlete, to Jevon Holland and can be that player because he's done it. He's blitzed from the outside and the inside. And it's not just about how fast you are, like you're saying with Jordan Hicks. It's about understanding protections and the timing of it. Jevon Holland got that down very quickly with Brian Flores. And I could very much see and envision Jay Ward being that Jevon Holland type player that plays a little free safety, but then on the next play on 3rd and long, after he's ranging from the deep middle, he's actually blitzing the quarterback.
Yeah, I think that in an ideal world, that's kind of what they're looking for. It is Jaquelin Roy. It took me a little bit to master that into my brain. I've said before, like, there are players who have complicated names to spell that I will be able to spell when I'm 97 years old because I wrote them so many times, like Afadi Adenabo could easily nail that. So with I've seared it into my brain. It is pronounced Jaquelin Roy. And one thing I noticed was that, like, Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, there were a few other ones who were actually extremely high on Jaquelin Roy. What was your take? Because this is not a relative athletic score that was impressive, and it's not production that it's impressive. So I guess you kind of have to look beyond the things we could see right in front of our face with him.
Yeah, first off, thank you for the pronunciation, because I think a lot of people think that with me watching like over 300 guys that I have the time to get all the pronunciations right. And a lot of times I'm just watching film either in silence or listening to music. So I'm not like hearing their names. I try to get like the crazy ones, but yeah, that one I would have definitely said Jaquelin Roy. Anyway, I think why people like Lance Zierlein, who's super smart, super plugged in, were high on him is because early in his career, I believe he was a big recruit coming in there to LSU as a freshman, as a sophomore. You saw those like ascending pass rushing moves and like, hey, if this 2022 is big, we could be talking about a first rounder. I think he was in a lot of early, like way too early mock draft first rounds last year. I feel like I put him in the first round last year. I never saw that step in 2022. He kind of looked like he did early in his career. And you figure getting bigger, getting stronger, more experience in the SEC, that he would have gotten more efficient as a pass rusher. He's an interesting one. Oh, I will say, because I've been kind of listening where I have these guys, this is one that I almost hit perfectly. I had him as my 164th overall player, and the Vikings picked him at 141, so pretty close. He's one that the RAS is low, and I will, believe in RAS more than just my eyes in general. He seemed a lot more athletic than that on film. And just looking back at my scouting report, prepping for this interview, I really liked his pass rushing moves. And I repeatedly wrote, like, he's got lead pipes for hands. What he utilizes, that swipe move, the swim move, bull rush, and counters off of it, there's a lot of pop in his hands. So even if you're thinking, okay, look, I'm gonna pay more attention to RAS below 4, it's pretty low, you know that he understands how to beat blockers with his hands. And it's one thing to not be a good athlete. If you're not a good athlete and you're just trying to bull rush your way to the quarterback every single rep in the NFL, you're going to be benched. You're going to be on the practice squad and be on a different team sooner rather than later. So I think with Roy, you get someone that is definitely advanced in the ways that he understands. You have to do it, multiple ways at the next level. And he's got a pretty good NFL caliber frame as well. So he's someone where they picked him felt about right. Would we have liked to see maybe the Vikings get someone that's more explosive up the field? Probably, just to add some pass rushing juice inside. But I do think he has that inside him because, again, his handwork is so good.
Yeah, I think this is the pick that I'm going to be the most skeptical about because, and I could be wrong on this, but because pass rush production has so well correlated to what guys do in the NFL, except Danielle Hunter. And also, I mean, somebody lacking that quickness in college with their strength, you can usually get away with that. But in the NFL, I mean, the offensive linemen are strong as heck too. So I have questions about this one. It's also not like a super high draft pick. It's just, was it the right thing to get someone who could potentially contribute as a pass rushing impact player? I have trouble seeing it, but that could turn out to be different. I don't know. Like when they took Asezi Atomo, it was like, okay, I see what you're getting at. You're taking this guy with a little bit of a lightning quickness that you think can be maybe a situational rusher. I'm not sure about this. Some people called him a nose tackle. Some people said like kind of a maybe somewhere in the 4-eye or 3-tech or whatever. Like, I don't know. I just see it as sort of a guy that you can get anywhere, but this is, again, not a very high draft pick. So I'm not going to like over scrutinize it. It's the one I have the most questions about. But let's talk about Jaren Hall, because this is, I mean, you draft a quarterback in any round. We have to talk about that quite a bit. I was super impressed with Jaren Hall on his conference call, which may sound silly, but you could pick up a lot from hearing a guy talk. To me, he has the vibes of career arc for Jaren Hall. Is he's a backup. He gets a handful of opportunities to play in injury situations or something. Can't really physically play in the NFL and becomes an offensive coordinator 3 years after he's retired. That's the vibes I get from Jaren Hall. Just like clearly high intelligence, high character, but I have a tough time seeing with the arm strength. Like, one of our colleagues tweeted out a back shoulder throw that he made. And I was like, well, that's a pick six. I mean, just, I think it's a fine pick. I have no criticism for it. It's a guy they like. That's totally okay. But I think you probably drafted Kellen Moore as a player, and that's okay. That's a backup, and that's somebody who becomes your offensive coordinator someday. So that was my take. I'm very interested in what you have to say on this one.
The career arc thing I could certainly get. I will say off the bat, he's more physically talented than Kellen Moore was. I know that, like you were just saying, that's like the arc where he went right from like backup in Dallas to like the QB coach right away. With Jaren Hall, definitely physical limitations with the arm strength. What I do think where he could maybe outplay that is because he has a really quick release. So like if you're thinking of, let's say Anthony Richardson in this class, and I was listening to the PFF podcast, like the Chris Collinsworth mock draft right before the first round, and I thought it was really interesting and kind of striking that his take was, hey, I get Anthony Richardson. I understand everything, but he has such a long release that he thought that like there's no way Anthony Richardson could play as a rookie because corners are going to sit on that. And once they see the long release, it's just going to be too easy for them to plant and drive on the football. In my head, I thought, well, hey, it's a long release, I guess, but he can throw the like 80 miles an hour. He can throw the football. It's kind of the opposite with Jaren Hall, that he does not have a big arm. It's substandard or sub-average by today's NFL standards, but I do like how quickly he gets it out. Underneath, intermediate range. I don't think, like you mentioned, that back shoulder, you don't really want him stretching it vertically because those back shoulders will probably be pick sixes. What I thought was interesting, too, for my scouting report and how it pairs with the Vikings, he's mobile. He has good athleticism. I believe he tested pretty well. But I also wrote he's not a very natural playmaker. He's not anywhere close to like a Bryce Young or even a Zach Wilson. Like Zach Wilson, that final season at BYU, he had some like 40, 50-yard runs where he's making guys miss. That is not Jaren Hall. But I think on the boot action, he's going to be very smooth. He can operate that, get it to the tight end in the flat. That is kind of a staple of the offense. So I think that was another one that was more like, hey, this is a nice fit for us. We understand that he's not going to ever replace Kirk Cousins and be the long-term answer. But if we are in a pinch, this is someone very similar to Kirk Cousins in terms of what he brings to the table. And I had him graded in the 180s. The Vikings picked him at 164. So we felt kind of similarly, like I thought late fifth round for him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I think that it's a total guarantee that he becomes Kellen Moore. I just have a lot of skepticism, again, when it comes to physical limitation quarterbacks, because you could bring up Drew Brees or you could bring up Bryce Young or Kyler Murray, but those guys are the extreme outliers. Even Russell Wilson is drafted quite a bit higher than Jaren Hall. He's also 25. And I probably exhausted all of my old man jokes on Hendon Hooker. Hendon Hooker is still older than Jaren Hall, which shows you how old he is. But we are not talking about somebody who is 20 years old. And I think you make a great point, though, about getting rid of the ball. That's a thing with shortstops in baseball. If you can't have a rocket arm and you're Rafael Furcal, then be Omar Vizquel and get rid of that ball real quick. So if that's great. Like, I really think that you probably picked a super high character, high intelligence, quality backup quarterback, maybe for 4 years, and then you don't have to pay for one. And that's totally fine. It probably ends up being worth it. Somebody else even brought up the idea of him being a bridge quarterback, going like if they move on from Kirk, but the guy they draft isn't ready, Jaren Hall can start for a little bit. before you get the other guy ready. But like when you pick someone in the 5th round with an upside that is backup quarterback, you can kind of go like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, am I supposed to have a blazing hot take on this?
No.
It's fine.
And one last thing I'll say is that I think if he had to play as a rookie because of injury or whatever, or if he did, and I think it would be a pretty good outcome if he does become that bridge, there would be more limitations to the offense. But I think, and we've kind of talked about this differently with putting, I don't know, let's just say Caleb Williams for the sake of people knowing that name, pluck someone that's really good and putting him in this offense. Holy crap. I think you could also put year 2 Jaren Hall and say, all right, we're not going to be that great of an offense, but we're not going to be like the worst offense in the league because, like I said, the smoothness on the boot action, he played a fair amount of football. He's got a quick release, and the situation. This is another plus of having offensive-minded former quarterback head coach that I think he would understand inside the mind of Jaren Hall, who I think is a pretty smart quarterback. Hey, I'm not going to try to make that deep throw to the flag route, between coverage. I'm going to check it down to the tight end, to the running back, or just find Justin Jefferson or find Jordan Addison. It wouldn't be crazy to see him in an extreme game manager role to kind of keep the offense afloat if he does need to play early.
Like a Josh Dobbs, maybe somebody who's
exactly
right.
That's like a good comp.
Decent athlete, super high IQ, class individual, probably not physically gifted enough to start, but if you got to play him, then you're probably not going to want to throw yourself off a bridge watching. So
yes.
The last pick we have here, and these breakdowns are just fantastic. This is exactly why you're here, Chris. DeWayne McBride, one of my favorite all-time conference calls. This man was through the roof to be drafted by the Vikes. He was so happy. It was fun. It was just fun to see. Like a lot of guys try to play cool, like, yeah, I just can't wait to play football, whatever. This guy could not stop smiling. He was so happy to be here. And you know what? Pretty impressive to watch back. And I know everyone's highlights are impressive, but I feel like the Vikings got someone who can be a part of their backfield right away. So give me your DeWayne McBride breakdown.
All right. When we're talking about value, and I'll stress that again, value, this was the Vikings' best pick. I had him graded in the 170, like late 170s, 177 overall. He was my number 8 running back. So if we're talking about that, I thought it was a steal. And this is someone that I always have running backs pushed down the board. Just quick aside about my position addition in my scouting grade book, running backs get none. So their raw grade is their raw grade. Quarterbacks get a boost, biggest boost. Wide receivers, edge rushers, running backs get none. So to still be in the 170s as a running back means I was pretty high on him. I wrote that he is such a smooth mover and he is the one cut back that I want in this class. Isn't that perfect for a Kevin O'Connell offense? And I think he was probably also happy, not just that he got drafted late in the 7th round, just ecstatic to not be undrafted. The future is kind of uncertain with Dalvin Cook. I don't think Alexander Mattison is like this waiting in the wings, like when the Titans had Derrick Henry and they were still playing DeMarco Murray, a thing like that, or Tony Pollard behind Zeke Elliott. So I could see him snatching like legitimate, I don't want to say bulk of the carries, but legitimate carries early in his career. His contact balance is outstanding. He has great power in his lower half. He doesn't seek out contact. He's not Todd Gurley that tries to find people to hit, but those diving tackle attempts from safeties, from linebackers, just glance off him. And I thought his film in 2021 was good. I thought it was even better in 2021, got a little bit more juice to his game. He's not going to hit home runs, but I really liked him in terms of forced missed tackles. He was up there in terms of percentage as with a lot of the backs that went way in front of him in this draft class. So to me, like for value, for draft philosophy that I've talked a lot about, and maybe it's kind of silly, this is what you should do. You should look for a DeWayne McBride in the 6th or the 7th round almost every year. And we've seen it a lot with guys. And I mean, I can't think of them all off the top of my head right now, but even Aaron Jones was a 5th round pick and he's gotten like 5 contracts by the Green Bay Packers. So I think you can get really good players at that position late. This was one of them in a situation with the Vikings that they might need to kind of lean on a very talented, fresh-legged running back as early as this season.
It's funny because most of the time my rule would be I I don't put any expectations on 7th round picks. If they make the team, congratulations to them. More likely they'll be a practice squad guy that has to really hustle to ever have an NFL career. That's always been true for 7th round picks. With this guy, I think it's not even unreasonable. Like, watching players try to tackle him was like trying to, if you ever tried to like jump on a basketball in a pool or something where it just like pops out away from you.
Very good.
Like that's watching people try to tackle this guy. It was exactly like what you would think a great running back would look like in college, where no one can really take him down. So I think that, with this, versatility probably isn't going to be his thing. This guy's going to run the football, and that's going to be it. But that's okay for where they got him. Go ahead. I was curious though about your overall grade for this, because I am totally fine with people giving grades to teams because we're grading what we think their process was, not what the results are. Shouldn't have to explain that. But anyway, some people get huffy when it comes to draft grades. So how did you grade the overall thing?
Very quickly, I will say, just so it's not just all heaping praise on a 7th round pick, did not catch a lot of passes at UAB. That could be a problem. I think you just spoke to that about the versatility, and he's not going to hit 70-yard touchdowns. But I thought there was more juice from getting the handoff through the second level, first level of defense, second level of the defense this past season. I actually just did my team by team draft grades for CBS. It came out yesterday or 2 days ago. I don't have like an intricate formula, but I do average all of my letter grades, and there is higher weight for the earlier picks. They came out right in the middle, 85, or 85 point something. So I gave them a B. I think in terms of addressing positional needs, they drafted a corner. They got some beef on the inside. They drafted a receiver, not my favorite receiver, but I'm glad they just drafted a receiver to be that clear number 2 to Justin Jefferson. He gets open. I think they probably place an emphasis on just pure separation ability more than most other teams that are maybe leaning yards after the catch. Getting the running back late, that's exactly where I think you should pick a running back. A potential backup or QB3 that has the ability to play right away. I almost like the fact that Jaren Hall isn't this high upside project where, oh my God, he needs to play and what are they going to do? I like that he's relatively high floor given his age and his experience. So I think it was not the greatest class, not like close to one of the worst classes, just right in the middle, a solid B for this Vikings class.
You gave it the same as I did. I liked a lot of the picks, but I don't think that anyone is thinking right now, oh my gosh, they just forged the path to the Super Bowl. No. But also it just, to me, like cohesive and thematic. And that was what we were looking for last year from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and didn't get. And this time we did. It made a lot of sense to me. And that's the best way I could put it. So even though it didn't blow my mind, even though they didn't get all 10 out of 10 relative athletic score athletes, and somehow they picked 2 defensive backs that I didn't include in my draft guide, which I was like, how is this possible? I tried to include everyone and they still picked outside of those guys. But I would say solid.
How about this? So when I was doing the draft grades, I realized, and this has probably happened before in NFL history, but they had a draft full of abbreviated team name players. LSU, USC, UAB, BYU. I was like, wow, that means absolutely nothing. But I thought it was hilarious when I was looking at what schools they went to. I was like, is there some analytics to that where they're just picking these abbreviated schools? No, I'm kidding. But it was a good, very calculated draft. I think you saw the GM take that next step and navigate the draft better than what he did last year.
Okay. I know that we've gone into great detail here, but we call it the epic for a reason. So I do have just one more question, but I wanted to say that to show the humorlessness of social media, I tweeted after their 3rd pick. I was like, oh, they just picked guys with the letter J. And people are like, well, what about Malik Black? Is like, I meant today, but like, guys, please get a hold of yourselves. You're going to be shocked to find out I wasn't serious that they were actually targeting guys with the letter J. Get a hold of yourself. Social media. People are like on edge during with Twitter and the draft. I mean, they are jacked up. The consensus board. We won't get into that, but it was really curious about your sort of the most intriguing, highest grade, lowest grade. Give me those.
Okay, I'll start with the lowest grade. I could probably go with a different team, but I've mostly said and written about the Falcons, just the Bijan Robinson at 8 overall because of obvious reasons. Not the player, it's the positional value, the replacement or the replaceability of the position. Matthew Bergeron, they picked right after that. I get it. It's a tackle. It's a premium position. I didn't think he's ready. I don't think he's ready to be a high caliber player. I know they have, Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry there, but it's why are you picking a backup offensive tackle at 38 overall? Love Zach Harrison. I'm trying to remember all these off the top of my head. I like Zach Harrison, the edge rusher from Ohio State. Clark Phillips is a good corner from Utah, but very low level athlete, tiny, short arms. Maybe he overachieves, but I didn't see someone that was that good in coverage to pick him in the 4th round. So I just didn't like what the Falcons did. They were in that prime spot to be hey, we're going to trade back from 8. We're going to make 9 picks here. We're going to still pick a good running back, a Tajay Spears, a Jahmyr Gibbs, a DeWayne McBride later in the draft. And they picked Bijan Robinson at 8 after they just got a 1,000-yard season from Tyler Algier, a 5th rounder who used to take handoffs from Jaren Hall at BYU. He averaged almost 5 yards a carry as a rookie. They have Cordarrelle Patterson. They of all teams should realize oh yeah, we can just have anyone back here and get 1,000 yards from them in this offense. So I didn't like what they did. And the Patriots class was very strange, not picking a receiver until the 6th round. Kayshon Boutte from LSU. That was kind of strange to me. They traded up for a kicker in round 4, which is a draft, cardinal sin of the draft community. They also drafted a punter. So the Patriots class, it's Bill Belichick doesn't really care. He has obscure drafts every year. So those two, in terms of worst drafts, in my opinion, and I'll be quick on the best. Denver Broncos, they only had 5 picks. And I think you mentioned it. It's a great point that usually the teams that have 14 picks were what a great draft. The Broncos only had 5. And I love Marvin Mims in round 2. He's a speedster, good after the catch, smaller. Drew Sanders in round 3 that a lot of us thought he could go in the 1st round. Not a great tackler, but if they let him rush off the edge, he can be really, really good on that defense, and they need another edge rusher. I loved Riley Moss from Iowa as a corner. He's twitchy. He was very productive for multiple seasons. And J.L. Skinner, the safety from BYU, big, very explosive, very rangy, also very productive. Just didn't work out during the pre-draft process. So I really liked what they did. Can say the Eagles and also the Pittsburgh Steelers. Darnell Washington, Keanu Benton seems like a classic Pittsburgh nose tackle. Pretty athletic, can get up the field, explosive hands. And then Joey Porter Jr., not just because of the story. I think he was kind of worth being a 1st-round pick, and technically he was the 32nd pick of the draft. So I think the Steelers did a very good job as well. But the Vikings, again, right there in that B to B plus range.
Well, I wanted to say that you have a pathetic relative athletic score yourself. Your arms are short. You have no height whatsoever. I've seen you run. It's not great. Your flexibility, the oiliness of your hips, pathetic. And you're not quicker than fast. You're neither.
No.
But here's what I'd write on my Chris Trapasso scouting report. Your work ethic is out of this world, and you bring a ton of heart, and you bring a ton of football IQ and knowledge to this podcast. It has been invaluable throughout this process for me to listen to you and all of our audience to get prepared for this draft. And I just can't say enough how much fun we had along the way. Loved having you at the Combine. Hope we could do it again next year. Just a great time, man. I looked forward to this every single week and can't say enough how much I appreciate it. We will certainly get together, talk about preseason camp, rookies who are emerging or whatever, and things like that. But it's like bittersweet to have reached the end of our time once again doing these weekly podcasts. So again, thank you so much for everything you brought to the show. Can't thank you enough. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man, it's been awesome. It's been an honor every week. I've looked forward to it every single week to be able to just rant about draft philosophies and someone actually listens and it's on a podcast. It's been a dream come true for me. And yes, every year I hope we get to do this. And I'll be definitely following the Vikings, their young players, guys from the last couple draft classes, and definitely rooting for DeWayne McBride because he was the one that I labeled as a legitimate steal in this draft class.
All right. Thank you so much again. And thank you everybody for listening to Draft Season. We will continue to have some more breakdowns from other analysts as well, but nothing quite like the level of detail of this from Chris. So follow him, Chris Trapasso on Twitter, cbssports.com, and we will catch you all next time. Thanks again, Chris.